Hey, everybody. Welcome to National Council on Severe Autism's latest webinar. My name is Jill Escher. I am president of NCSA, and this is a very rare occasion in which I am conducting a webinar in which I and my interviewee are in the same city. This never happens. This is a first. Today, we are talking to Jan Stokley, who is the executive director of the Housing Choices Coalition, which is based here in San Jose, California. She has been executive director there for 10 years, and she has a background as an affordable housing lawyer before that. She is also the parent of a 35-year-old daughter who has disabilities, including medical disabilities. So she's lived it, and she has been toiling in the trenches here in the Silicon Valley area, for more than a decade to try to obtain housing for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, not just autism. She really knows the ins and outs about she not only finds them housing, she is instrumental in creating new housing, which is a very hard thing to do, as you can imagine. So I'm very happy that our webinar features Jan today. This webinar will last about an hour. It is being recorded, so if you have to get up and leave, don't worry. We're going to post it to our website and our YouTube channel. If you have questions or would like to say anything, you can use chat or Q&A. I'm going to monitor both. I will interject with questions from time to time as Jan conducts the webinar, but we're going to hold most of the questions for the end, about 15 minutes or so. Okay, so with that, I am happy to turn this over to Jan Stokley. Jan, welcome.
Thank you, Jill. It's so nice to be here. I appreciate that wonderful introduction. I have been talking to Jill over more than a year about the increasing incidence of homelessness among people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And my concern level continues to rise. And I just appreciate the opportunity to share my perspectives, my experiences, and my concerns with the larger autism community, and hopefully learn more about what you're seeing in your own community. My experience is definitely informed by the work here at Housing Choices, which is very much, in the heart of Silicon Valley, one of the highest cost housing areas in the nation. So that definitely slants my point of view. But I think there are larger demographic trends and failures of state and federal policy that make the risk of increased homelessness among the folks that we work with, the people we care about, our loved ones, that I believe that incidence is going to continue to increase significantly over the next 2 decades. And I don't see policy level leadership to address it. And that's why I'm excited to talk to the autism community today about how we might respond at the state level, at the local level, and most importantly, all of us as parents at the family level. I have some information about Housing Choices. We're a nonprofit and we focus exclusively on people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And of course, with the rise in the autism diagnosis, that makes up a significant share of the community we serve. We provide housing navigation services to help people with disabilities find housing. And we also are very involved in advocating for inclusive housing for our community. And once people move into housing, we have a housing retention service that we provide. And so we're currently controlling the lease up of about 325 apartments in 21 different affordable rental properties in our high cost area. We have a number of other properties underway in development. And I feel like we're doing as much or more as anyone in California, if not nationally, to create inclusive housing for people with disabilities. And yet, even with our success locally, what we're achieving is just a small fraction of the total need. And that need is going to grow significantly. And I don't see solutions in the works. And that's why I'm concerned about the increased risk of homelessness among a very vulnerable population. We see here in California some demographic factors that really point to continued significant growth in the adult population. With autism and other intellectual and developmental disabilities, we have a big increase in adults entering their 30s and 40s. We have a big increase in adults who are living past age 62. Many more adults are going to outlive their parents than in past decades. And at the same time as the adult population is growing, here in California, we're experiencing decreased supply of residential alternatives. We have a systemic ongoing decline in the supply of licensed care homes. And then within those homes, there's a slower rate of turnover because of longer lifespans. So even in the homes that are still in business, there's fewer vacancies, right? And then our mission, which is to help people with developmental disabilities live successfully in affordable housing, that's increasingly difficult to achieve because of the long-term and growing mismatch between the incomes of the adults we support and the affordable rents of affordable housing. So what we're already seeing in the 2,000 people that we serve annually, we're seeing increased displacement to lower cost regions. So we're seeing adults, as their parents pass away, being displaced from coastal California to lower cost areas of California. And we have a homeless case management program, and we have an increase in homelessness among people with developmental disabilities. So we're already experiencing it, and it's just going to get worse, I'm afraid, if we don't have a stronger policy response. So when I think about policy response, here in California, we have a state agency called the Department of Developmental Services. They have a $10 billion budget, not anything to sneeze about, even in California. But if you search their website for any mention of homelessness or displacement, it's not discussed. And that's because there's really no real acknowledgement or response to the issue. Even though we have a pretty robust advocacy community bringing up the concerns, we don't see leadership at the state level that really acknowledges what's happening. And so that's extremely concerning to me. And I'm hoping that more families will get involved in advocating on this issue. So what's driving this issue? Of course, you're aware of the growth in the adult population, which was predicted, more than a decade ago, more than 2 decades ago, because of the increase in the autism diagnosis that began over 30 years ago and continued consistently year over year. And so these slides reflect some trends here in California, but I imagine it's not all that different in other parts of the nation. So you can see the increase in California between 2015 and 2021 in the total population. And you'll see significant gains in the over 62, the 52 to 61, the 42 to 51. The adult population is really growing, as is the population under 18. And that is mirrored in the Bay Area, which is this smaller chart. And I think that this is consistent with national trends, right? That resulting from what we have called the Autism Tsunami. So the growth in the adult population, the longer lifespans, This is all contributing to the need for more residential options. This slide really talks about an issue that you're all probably aware of, which is the gains in life expectancy of adults with IDD. They continue to increase overall. Gains do vary depending on disability. And we see that here in California, the number of adults living past age 61 grew by 38% in just a 6-year period. The other striking thing that I want to show you about this chart is that here in the Bay Area, we are really seeing decline in the adult population 42 to 51 and 52 to 61. And I don't think that's due to death. I really do believe that's due to, as parents or primary caregivers pass away, those adults are at greater risk of losing connection with this regional center system that's tracking the demographics. And it's that loss of connection and possible displacement and homelessness that I think this slide really points to. And to me, it's no coincidence that it's the 42 to 51 and 52 to 61, because that's when we're most likely to see parents passing away. The other big trend here in California, and again, I don't know what's happening nationally, but it's extremely worrying here, is every year we continue to lose supply of spaces for people in licensed facilities. Because of my own daughter's, medical and other needs, she absolutely needs to be in a licensed facility where there's nursing and other specialized support. And so we do know there's a significant part of our population that would benefit from licensed facilities, and they're in decline. Here in the Bay Area, which is very high cost region, obviously, we lost 7% of our supply in the 6 years between 2015 and 2021. But California overall is also losing supply. So with this loss in supply of licensed care homes, more adults are turning to affordable housing with on-site supportive services as an alternative to living in a licensed facility. But unfortunately, there is an income and rent mismatch for many adults, even in housing that is, quote, affordable. And that's because rent in affordable housing properties is pegged to changes in the area median income. And in coastal California, particularly in the Bay Area, the area median income just keeps increasing dramatically every year because we have this big divide between haves and have-nots. Whereas SSI is a national benefit with a California supplement. It's very low and it's not tied to regional differences in housing costs. So what that means, and our organization lives with this every day, is even housing in our region that is supposed to be affordable to extremely low income people, that housing is out of reach for people whose income is limited to SSI. And so unless you're fortunate enough to have a housing choice voucher, you're not going to be able to income qualify even for the most affordable of the affordable units.
So Jan, let's pause for 1 second. For some of our audience might not be familiar with SSI. If you could just briefly explain what SSI is and just give some examples of the monthly income if you're an SSI recipient.
Sure. So SSI stands for Supplemental Security Income. It's a public benefit for people with disabilities. It's an income program. The monthly income here in California, where we have a California supplement, the monthly SSI income, the highest is at $1,040. And so in contrast, the rent on a 1-bedroom apartment where the rent is priced to be affordable at 50% of the area median income, very low income, the rent is about $1,500. So that's just to kind of show that the rent, at least here in
Even for a low income.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
and if you're looking at a standard market rate, 1 bedroom. Yeah.
So you're not going to be able to afford
would
market rate
be-
housing, but even the affordable housing, which is in short supply, it's
Mm-hmm.
not truly affordable for the people we serve, who depend on SSI because they're not able to work.
Right. Now, you also mentioned in your comments, housing choice voucher. Could you
Yeah.
give a quick explainer?
Sure. So a housing choice voucher is also known as Section 8. It's a program administered by an entity called a housing authority. And it's basically a rent subsidy program to close the gap between 30% of someone's actual income and the rent for a typical apartment at an agreed fair market rent. And so the voucher is a rent subsidy that enables the people we serve to have more housing options. Here in California, there's not enough housing vouchers. It's estimated that fewer than 20% of the California population that's eligible for that Section 8 voucher is actually receiving it. So it's very unusual for the folks we serve to actually have a voucher. That voucher could be very valuable, right? But it's just not available.
Right. And this is how I do my housing business. I have a small housing business, and my disabled tenants have those vouchers, which enables them to access housing in the community. Okay, Jan, thank you for those explainers. Back to
Keep
you.
going. All right, back to it. So this chart is really, it's very California focused, but it's intended to illustrate what I was talking about earlier. Here on the right side of the chart, you see some California's highest cost counties, including the counties we serve. Santa Cruz, Santa Clara, Marin, San Francisco, San Mateo. And in those counties, the rent for a 1-bedroom apartment that's priced to be affordable to someone who's extremely low income is over 100% of the actual monthly public benefit that the adult would receive under SSI. And I know California is extreme, but I'm sure there are other parts of the country where the same issue is surfacing because the SSI benefit is very low. It's fixed, it's pegged to a national rate. It's not adjusted for differences in local housing costs. It's not a source of income that enables people to live on their own in affordable housing. And this chart is even more localized because it's Santa Clara County. But again, it shows you the gap between the monthly rent for an extremely low income studio apartment and the SSI award. Now, when people are able to work, which is this yellow line here, we have a local minimum wage. And so if our adults are able to work 20 hours a week, then their ability to get into affordable housing, it goes up because their income is so much better than if they just have SSI. But obviously not all of our adults, including my daughter, would be able to work. That's not an option for everyone. And then this is just an illustration of a property that we recently leased up. It's a beautiful new property. 15 of the 70 studio apartments are set aside for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We ended up having 5 studio apartments that rented for $835 a month. And remember, the SSI award in California is $1,040 a month. So the rent was almost all of their check. And then 10 of the apartments were priced at $1,382 a month, which exceeded the SSI. So we had this wonderful housing opportunity, but there was a mismatch. There is a mismatch, and we're continuing to struggle with it, between the income of the population that we support and the most affordable of affordable housing that's being created in our area. So what does this mean? I'm sure you are all very well aware of this reality, but as the population with developmental disabilities grows and the residential options decline, the service system has come to rely very heavily on the family home to house adults with developmental disabilities. And so you see, again, this is California and the Bay Area, which is what I happen to care about and know about. But you'll see the decline in adults having the option to live in licensed care facilities, the decline, slight increase, but not very much, in the ability to have their own apartment with supportive service. And then the big jump, over 30% in California, almost 30% increase in the Bay Area, of adults who have really no alternative other than to remain in the family home. So for me, a service system that's built on reliance on the family home for adults is really short-sighted, because if you think about adults aging in their family home, their parents are aging alongside them. As we all age, we're going to experience decline in income and health. There's some of us who can't afford to retire, right? Because of the decline in income that we would experience. So we're aging alongside the adult. And with that, we become less and less reliable as the primary houser and primary caregiver. So what I totally expect to see is that the autism tsunami is now approaching the 40 and 50-year-old decades, and it's going to continue to increase. And I expect that that means we'll see more homeless with developmental disabilities. The other thing is, we all know that there's some adults like my daughter who are going to need a lot more support, and they're going to need it even before the parents become too old to provide housing. And then finally, what's really striking here in California is there's been tremendous growth in racial, ethnic, and economic diversity in the regional center population. And so what we see in the caseload that we're serving is that with increased racial and ethnic diversity, we see families themselves living in overcrowded housing, very unstable housing. And so what that means is it's less likely that the family is going to be a big provider of financial support to cover what state and federal policies are not doing. So this growing number of housing insecure families, it's going to be even harder for them to come up with a plan for a secure home for their adult child when they're no longer able to do it. And so why don't we just let everybody become homeless, apart from the fact that that's a terrible solution? We know, we work closely with our homeless service system here in our geographic area. And a big source of frustration is many of the homeless service systems, which are highly localized, they're not set up to identify and serve people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. There's an annual homeless count that tracks homelessness. It asks about mental illness. It asks about traumatic brain injury, but intellectual, developmental disability, autism, they're not even asked about. And then the people who are working in that service system, they may have training in, mental illness or substance abuse, but they have no training to speak of in terms of identifying and understanding how to work with somebody who has an intellectual or developmental disability. And so if we're going to see increased homelessness, which I would rather we not see, we have to really intervene with the homeless service system so that they're better able to identify and assess and serve people with autism and other developmental disabilities. There's also national research that shows once a person with intellectual and developmental disability enters homelessness and becomes connected, hopefully, with the homeless support system, the data shows that they're less likely to be reunited with families than people with treatable disabilities. Treatable would mean like mental illness or substance abuse. I don't exactly understand why that's the case, but there is data to show that. They also have more severe service and healthcare needs, and they're more likely than other homeless people to oppose exiting homelessness. So homelessness is just a terrible outcome for adults with developmental disabilities. It's not a good outcome for anybody, but particularly for the population we serve, it's really devastating. The other thing to know, and we see this in our work with homeless with developmental disabilities, is that once the person
Jan,
becomes...
I need to pop in with just one question.
Sure.
Okay. So I think a lot of people on this webinar are looking at this saying, well, my son, usually a son, sometimes daughter, could never be homeless because if that happened within one day, he or she would be dead, right? Because our audience is mostly severe autism. These are people who tend to have very minimal language, who tend to have next to, no self-care ability, no self-advocacy ability, right? Like if my son or daughter were homeless, they would die within a day. They would walk across the street, they'd be hit, they'd die of hypothermia, hunger, whatever it is. So how does this, people with severe autism, I mean, I can't even imagine what it would be like for them to be homeless. Like they can't survive. Can you maybe put a little bit of dressing on this?
I think these studies are looking at a whole range of intellectual and developmental disabilities, and including autism. But I think you're hitting on a point that for some of us, including my daughter, there would be police and healthcare intervention immediately if she became homeless, right? Because the severity is so obvious. Whereas there's some people with developmental disability where it may be not as clear that what their disability is and how to work with them. And I think that's probably of more concern when we talk about, will they be identified? Will they be assessed? Will they get the services that are appropriate for them? But yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I agree, even with respect to my own daughter. If my daughter became homeless, I have to believe that the public health system would step in and rescue her, right? Because it's so obvious how severe her disability is.
Right. Then the question is, what we're seeing, right, across the country is these young adults in the ER or some emergency crisis placement, and there's nowhere for them to go. Right.
Yeah.
So there's no diversion to a home. So it's, and it goes to your point, right? We're not creating more supply while demand is increasing. Anyway, I'm sorry to interject. Go back to where you were, Jan. I'm going to.
No, that's a great point. And so, so what we see with our adults who are homeless or at risk of homelessness is like, there is no good solution. They're not going to do well in a shelter, right? But there aren't enough. We should have more variety of settings for people while permanent solutions are developed, and we just don't have them now. So that's a great point. Okay. So displacement, that's the other thing we see here in the Bay Area. We see our regional center system having to relocate adults with developmental disabilities to other regions of California. We're talking about the Central Valley, but they're lower cost regions where there's going to be more supply of residential settings, more affordable housing. I think that's a terrible solution also, because displacement from your home community, it's very destabilizing. And the adults we work with, they need every network of support that they have, and they built up those networks hopefully over years of living in the community they grew up in. And to displace them to another region and care, it's not really great option. So, so we have a statewide system, and each area has a regional center, and people can be relocated to lower cost parts of California. But I don't think that that should be our systemic solution to what we're experiencing. But it's definitely happening, and it's not something that I think our policy system should be encouraging. Okay, so then what do we do if we have all these factors leading to increase in homelessness or displacement of adults with developmental disabilities? I think we are really lacking in federal and state policies to prevent that result, and that's the number one problem. We do need local solutions, and there's a lot that can be done locally. And I encourage you to get involved locally, but it won't replace the need for strong federal and state policies with big investments in creating residential options for the folks that we serve. And then families, again, I just try to encourage families to assume that things are going to continue to get worse before they get better, and just to build your family planning around that, as discouraging as that sounds. So one of the things that we see here in California is that our State Department of Developmental Services measures outcomes based on where people live, and they treat living in the family home as an equally positive performance outcome without regard to the age of the adult. And we think that this outcome should be age banded for adults, with the corresponding message that as adults age in place with aging parents, there's increased risk of displacement or homelessness. And this is something we've really been pushing here in California, but I think it should be done everywhere. We shouldn't assume that 40 and 50-year-olds, because they're still living in the family home, that that's necessarily a great outcome. I see it as an at-risk of homelessness outcome. And then the other thing that I see is adults who are disappearing from our statewide system of tracking people with developmental disabilities. They disappear when a family member passes away who made sure to maintain the connection. They disappear because they got displaced to another part of California. 1,000,001 reasons. But we have to do better tracking of people who are lost from the system and we don't know why. And I think that should be an outcome. And then we need to elevate reporting on the net loss of licensed care homes and identify it as a crisis. So measuring what matters, that should be happening in every state. And I think that these are outcomes that should be measured. And then we have some initiatives to improve reimbursement rates in California, but right now I think we can directly attribute the loss of licensed care facilities to the inadequacy of the reimbursement rate. So there's some limited initiatives to deal with this here in California, but not nearly approaching the scale of the problem. I think we need to look at how we use our dollars in the developmental service system. We can't get federal matching funds to pay for housing costs, but state general fund dollars could be used for that cost. And I think redirecting some of this $10 billion in services towards supporting bonds.
Again, I'm gonna come in just for a clarification point, just for those who might not understand. when Jan's talking about federal HCBS matching funds, what she means is that HCBS is home and community-based services. It's one branch of the Medicaid funding system. And the Medicaid funding system pays for services, but not for brick and mortar, right? Not for your rent, not for housing, not for your utilities, et cetera. It's for services. And the matching funds, basically, she means that into a state system will flow both state dollars and federal Medicaid dollars in HCBS. Anyway, Jan, sorry about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so thanks, Joe. I guess the basic point is other systems have redesigned and reprioritized where they spend their dollars, such as mental health and veterans, right? And they've decided that having a place to live is foundational for everything. And they have reprioritized and redirected some of their service dollars to create more residential settings. And I think that's what we need to do as well, at least talk about doing that. There's a lot that everybody can do locally. This is where Housing Choices puts its effort. A lot of local organizing and advocacy to create housing for people with developmental disabilities. It's really great and it's doable, but we're not going to achieve the scale of housing solutions that we need until we have federal and state policies that drive that outcome. So I encourage you to figure out what's going on locally to create care homes and to create affordable housing for people with developmental disabilities and to get involved. But we need more federal and state policy solutions to get this work done to scale of the need. So then finally, for families, my message is always plan ahead and kind of, I hate to say it, but assume the worst in terms of the systems of services and support and funding for people with developmental disabilities. I'm a big proponent of CalAble accounts. Those dollars can be used to help supplement rent and help, increase housing options. So if you have the resources to save in a CalAble account, that's a great strategy because it can be used to help with housing costs. I really encourage every adult who's able to work to focus on employment because the SSI public benefit is it's not enough to live on, and we need to get more people into employment if they're able. And when it comes to securing either a space in a licensed care home or an affordable rental apartment, you have to start working on it years before you actually need it because the waiting lists are so long. And then I think just be very realistic about what you can expect from siblings when you've passed on. Because here, at least here in California, a lot of siblings have necessarily moved out of the area, right? For better jobs, lower housing, whatever. And so just, don't build all your plan around the siblings. I know I have in my heart the belief that my other daughter and my son will take care of my daughter with disabilities. But I have to understand that they could easily, leave the area for a job or whatever. So I do ask parents to be realistic about banking on the siblings role when you've passed on, because we've seen that that's been a problem for some of the adults we work with, that there wasn't a plan other than that the siblings would be able to handle it, and that's not always the case. So that was it. It was very California oriented. I'm sorry about that, but it's the only thing I know about. I hope it triggered some questions for you based on what's happening in your region of the country.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jan. And thanks for being just so data-based, experience-based, and realistic about this horrific crisis that we're obviously facing. It's very difficult. The disability advocacy world, I think, is very filled with Pollyannish people who kind of hide the reality or don't want to talk about the reality. So you are really a breath of fact-based fresh air. So thank you. We do have a number of wonderful questions. So let's go there. Gosh, where should I start? Sorry. I'll just go to the top. What is the reason, Katrina asks, for cuts to funding for licensed facilities? And do we see that trend continuing nationwide? Are these facilities being closed? Is anything being proposed by those who cut the funds for our high needs IDD population? Yeah, so I want to say one kind of clarifying thing that might help frame this, that, and maybe this comes from my experience being a landlord. A lot of these low income housing developments, what are often called set asides, are very inappropriate for our population. You know, they usually are in dense, multi-family environments. There aren't yards. You're next to neighbors who can hear you, screaming and banging. They often don't have a lot of space if you need a lot of caregivers. I have seen many cases involving evictions, where somebody just an adult or young man with a developmental disability, usually autism, was just miserable in being kind of caged in this small environment. What these licensed care homes sometimes provide, not always, are more spacious environment, with a backyard, with a fence, with a perimeter fence, for example, sometimes some distance from other neighbors who tend to complain, sometimes rightfully so, about noise or damage. So, this is really an issue. Sometimes what the inclusion people think of as, perfectly good housing is a nightmare, right, for a lot of people. Now,
Yeah.
I just wanted to kind of preface that, because I think Katrina kind of, when she asked this, has this in mind, like, why are we defunding, these license, these specialty options?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's
So,
being proposed to make up for it?
yes. So, I think it's really clear they're not being closed or defunded. The reimbursement rates are so low that the operators, the proprietors, as they reach retirement age, their best solution is to sell off the home or, as a single family home, and not sell it at a below market price that would enable it to continue to be operated as a care home. So I think the reality is we're losing supply, not because somebody's like closing them or defunding them, but because the economics of the reimbursement rates that are being offered don't enable the home, don't make it possible to sell the home to someone else who can operate it, and yet the seller can still get the market price. So I think that's what's happening. Not that homes are being closed, but that reimbursement rates are just not keeping up with the true value and the true cost of doing business.
Right, and that's also, part of the staffing crisis.
And the staffing crisis just exacerbates that difficulty getting staff, right? Because within those reimbursement rates, you have to pay for the cost of the home itself, the mortgage or all the associated costs, which are going up dramatically. But you also have to pay for the staff to keep it open, and the rates are not sufficient to pay staff enough. So the entire economic enterprise is resting on reimbursement rates that are just too low.
All right, let's go on. We have a lot of questions. Oh my gosh. In states where there is such an option, or the quote unquote nuclear option would be for the family to petition the state courts to have the person made, quote, a ward of the state. The state is legally responsible. I've known people who've done that with their children, made their children ward of the state. I don't know, and in these cases, they live in group homes in Northern California, not in an urban area. and there's some contact still, but with family members, even though they're ward of the states. I don't know, Jan. I don't see this happening, this nuclear option happening much, especially with adults. I'm not familiar with how it works in other states.
Yeah, I haven't seen that here in California, but it may be happening. But I think for many families, that's a really difficult choice, right?
Well, I have a
So,
tenant, for example, the parents did give up the guardianship of their adult daughter. And the daughter is now, I guess you would call it a ward of the public guardian,
yeah,
right?
right.
I guess that is sort of legally tantamount to making your child a ward of the state. And this person, this individual receives Section 8 funds, which is why she's my tenant and she lives with staff. And I guess it's dependent on that state guardian, the public guardian of the county, right, to oversee her care.
Mhm.
Maybe that's the rough equivalent
Yeah. Yeah,
here.
we don't see that happening a lot, but maybe it should be something parents should be told about so that they at least know it exists.
Yeah, and I don't know what the public guardians, if they have some special access to housing, right, that that family guardians don't. But people, please feel free to type in if you have experience with this nuclear option. Please feel free to type it in to chat. Okay, I'd appreciate that. All right, going on. Sorry, I could keep talking. Displacement is the #1 option in the state of Alaska. Almost all services for the IDD are in Anchorage. And I guess I'm not too familiar with Alaska, but it's probably distant from some of the population centers. Are there studies regarding the correlation of homelessness and the lack of caregivers and workers to provide 24-hour supervision to those with autism who need that level of care? Are there studies? Oh God, there's like no studies.
Yeah,
Jan?
there's studies that show the correlation between homelessness and developmental disabilities. There's some information about that, but not anything along the lines of what you're describing.
Does California have expanded Medicaid? I'm not sure what she means by that.
Yeah, I don't know what expanded Medicaid means.
Yeah,
but-
Cassandra, feel free to elaborate on that. Um, okay, someone's asking, Katrina again, about Hcbs. Is the Hcbs push for inclusion part of the current crisis?
I don't think so, at least not here in California. The rules were relaxed and there are families continuing to move ahead and create intentional communities, right, that are dedicated with services for people with developmental disabilities. So I don't think the Hcbs rules are responsible. I think it's more the economics of our population compared to the cost of living that's responsible, and the lack of federal and state policies to close that gap. We see intentional communities being developed here in the Bay Area, where the buy-in price for a family is like $400,000. And most of the population.
Which sounds expensive until you try to buy your own home for $1.5 million.
Exactly.
Right?
It's still a good solution if you have 400,000.
Yeah.
It's a great solution, and parents are designing wonderful communities. So Hcbs isn't preventing it. What's preventing it is that most families don't have those resources.
However, that said, there are many examples of projects around the country that went cold or substantially downsized because of concerns about these really stupid Hcbs regulations, or at least the implementation of those regulations, the reading, the perception of those regulations. Similarly, some states have imposed caps of 25% on any new development being allocated to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and that has radically changed, the nature of how many units could be provided in a given development. And that we see some evidence that hopefully we're walking away from that, but that is a terrible form of discrimination that, in my opinion, has really resulted in a decrease in the absolute number of units. Okay, going on. Do you have any specific recommendations for building political support for supportive housing for adults with high needs? My county is almost 1 million people and has 0 such facilities. My son is 10 now, and I would like to begin the process.
So, gosh, I'm happy to talk offline and describe how we've generated local political support for housing for people with developmental disabilities. It's very doable, but it's long-term and a lot of work and a lot of organizing. And it's more of a challenge, again, because of the lack of those federal and state dollars that incentivize it to happen. But we've been able to get a lot of local support just by organizing families to go to planning commissions, to go to city councils, to describe housing need and get local support for supportive housing that includes people with developmental disabilities. So it's definitely doable, but the scale compared to the level of need that we're seeing, the two don't match.
Can I go on my little rant for 1 second about Section 8? It's not like our country doesn't have programs. There are safety net programs in our country, both in terms of Medicaid, the service provision, and in terms of housing, which comes from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, typically, and then just with money dispersed to the local housing authorities, as Jan described earlier in this talk. The problem is those housing subsidies, as she said, are very rare, particularly like here, like in the Bay Area, where the wait lists tend to be completely closed, even to the people with the most obvious and extreme needs. There's no priority, right, given to somebody, let's say, I don't know, like my son Johnny, I'll use him, who absolutely can't work, who absolutely can't care for himself, who absolutely will never, ever be able to provide for his own housing, right? He's just an example. The system is completely broken. At times, the housing authorities will create priorities for those who are exiting institutions, right? It's part of the inclusion, right, mantra.
Yeah.
But there's like no institutions left in California. And so a lot of these housing vouchers are left unused, right? Because we're like, well, we have to use it for people who are leaving, whatever institution.
Yeah.
Well, what about the people who are living with sick and ailing parents? Where's the priority for that?
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. And to me, it's a crime of the highest order. And I really think we do need to somehow focus on that issue in our advocacy. Okay, that's my rant.
Totally agree with your rant. Totally agree.
Yeah, and then it would incentivize more, mom and pop landlords like me, right, to provide housing for people with IDD, because these people we know they can't pay rent without subsidies. Okay, going on. In my state, New Mexico, we're having a crisis, lack of support staff. Even though there are licensed places, there's no staff. Are you seeing that trend nationwide?
Definitely here in California. It's really awful in terms of inability to staff existing programs. And again, the reimbursement rates are too high. Inflation is pushing wages.
Well, the reimbursement rates are too low.
Too low.
Yeah.
And people need to earn a certain level of income to survive in a high cost area. And the reimbursement rates do not support like a living wage for people who work in the field. So it's definitely huge in California.
Expanded Medicaid offers insurance this is going back the earlier question, to more individuals that generally do not qualify, and they receive more federal dollars. I just looked online and it does look like California did expand Medicaid. It would be interesting to know what California is using those extra funds for. Okay, I'm going to admit I'm not totally sure.
Yeah, so there has been talk, nothing's ever been done, about allowing Medicaid funds to be used to help pay for the cost of housing. But it doesn't have any real political traction. Because you think about the total dollar cost would really grow. So I don't know if that's incorporated in expanded Medicaid or not, but there's definitely been policy discussions about, for high need individuals, allowing Medicaid dollars to be used towards the cost of housing and not just for medical and supportive services. So that would be something worth watching and researching and exploring.
Absolutely. Desiree, hi Desiree, it's so nice to see you, or your name. So Medicaid for long-term supports and Medicaid for health insurance are different programs. Thank you, Desiree. Christine says, what about DDS's $10 billion budget? Why isn't DDS paying for housing directly? Jan.
Well, I think that's my point. How do we get DDS to step up to the plate and acknowledge that the service system they're administering is not going to be effective if they don't address the housing and residential living options more effectively than they have? I don't know how we get DDS to pay attention to that and prioritize it. I feel like they're kind of stuck in a time warp when the system was created and costs were so much more manageable in the larger community. And I don't know, but I'm willing and ready to work with anybody who wants to tackle that with DDS. I've tried. Yeah.
Me, I sign up, Jan. Okay, there are several more questions, but I actually want to interject with one question of my own. One question that I get quite frequently from families is, usually an aging parent, someone like me, a parent in their 50s or 60s, they own their home and they want their child to remain in the home after they die, right? What advice would you give to them? Obviously, the home would have to be paid for in some fashion. If it's not paid off already, there would have to be some fund to pay the mortgage, if there is a mortgage, and of course, all the ongoing utilities, maintenance costs, repair, etc. And then also, I guess there's a question about how it's titled, just to make sure that the house remains for the benefit of that individual during his or her lifetime. Can you speak to any advice for parents in that situation?
So there is good literature about that housing solution. Here in California, we've kind of labeled those legacy homes. And I don't have a link to learn more about it, but I think that making sure you have the resources to pay off the mortgage, making sure you're also leaving the dollars that will help cover the operating costs, and then creating the legal structure that is needed to protect the home for your child's benefit. Those are really key components. And then making sure you have a strong, sound service provider. So you're planning for the home, but you're also have a service plan. So it's been
the service
done.
plan
it's
would
doable, but it's a lot
presumably
of money and a lot of work.
Yeah, and you would recommend a special needs trust for the home, or how should the home be held legally? Do you have any
So
thoughts on
yeah,
that?
I don't know how the home should be held legally. I'm sorry, but there are resources that describe all that. So maybe I can find those for you, Jill, and send them to you, and you can get it out to the group.
Yeah, it'd be nice to post as a link in our notes. Okay, so hold on. There's so many other questions. All right. Desiree's talking about the nuclear option is how people in other states have to get services. Remember, California is the only state with the Lanterman Act, which is an act that supposedly, in theory, entitles people to support services. Other states have their voluntary programs that they have to be homeless or a ward of the state to get comprehensive services because the wait lists are so jammed. Okay.
Yeah, and I would just say the Lanterman Act entitles you to certain services, but it's not addressing the
theory.
problem of where you're going to live. And that's the flaw of the Lanterman Act.
Yeah. Yeah, you can interpret the Lanterman Act's language different ways. The Lanterman Act does actually require DDS to ensure that there are housing resources, right, for this population. It doesn't make them a housing provider, but that's quibbling over statutory language. A couple of people have written in about how the wages for caregivers are lower than that for people, for example, working in fast food. Someone said $10 an hour. Can you imagine? It's very, very hard work, $10 an hour. Oh my gosh. Let's see, sorry. Okay, I don't understand some of these, sorry. Here's a good 101 article, Bequeathing a Home. Okay, so if you guys look, Desiree in the chat. Thank you, Desiree. Desiree's really, Desiree Kamika is an amazing housing expert. A lot of people, I'm sure, know her. She's posted a link, which I am going to copy myself right now. Bequeathing a home or an asset to a loved one with a disability. Thank you, Desiree. Bay Area Housing Corporation, that's also here in the Bay Area, has a legacy home program, and I encourage you to check out that link as well in the chat. And okay, oh, actually we're past 2 o'clock. Okay, so I'm going to have to cut off here, even though I can kind of ramble going through this for a while. Please take a look at chat, copy and paste what you want before we sign off. I will take this recording and I will hopefully get it up on YouTube today and on our website today. Jan, if people need to contact Housing Choices, what do they do?
Email jan@housingchoices.org.
Okay. Any last words before we close?
Oh, I just want to thank everybody for all you do, and thank Jill for being such an amazing moderator. And I hope some of this was relevant to you in your different parts of the state, and look forward to hearing from anybody who wants to learn more about what we do at the local level.
Jan, thank you so much, guys. Okay, we're going to sign off, and I appreciate everybody showing up on this Friday afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.